our clients and from our friends within the industry are very interesting. So we want to make sure that we get some of that input from this session. So we'll have a couple of polls that we'll do as we go through the webinar so we can get some additional insight from yourselves. A big subject of this discussion here is the Carbon Disclosure Project itself and how to make reporting more effective for your business so that it helps you through that understand, improve, and succeed value proposition that we're all pursuing. And so we wanted to start things off. If you go to the next slide, Duncan, I think, Dylan, you'll kick up a poll here. We just wanted to talk about, get some input from you as far as what are the biggest challenges that you currently have with the reporting. And if that is around quantifying carbon footprint itself, understanding the risks and opportunities related to the business, communicating the business case or business value internally, for example, why you would or why you should spend time focusing on this, or integrating carbon into the governance and core business process of your business. If it's many of our clients are frustrated having some of these issues looked at from an external perspective and not really tied into the core business. And then we also have another one there for just another issue, or if you don't currently report to the CDP. So if you could go and fill that out, we'll be able to take a look at that. And Dylan, is that something we can take a look at right away, or should we, I'm not exactly sure how much time we'll need to have in order to get people to complete that.
We'll give it another 10 seconds or so.
All right, so go ahead and finish that up, and then what we'll do is get into the subject matter of the webinar itself. We'll have Zoe get into some discussion about really where the Carbon Disclosure Project is currently and some of the trends going on, and then Duncan will get on the carbon management practices. So it looks like based on the results, we've got a fair mix of those items. So quite a few people aren't reporting to the CDP, or at least have some other issue. So Zoe, there's a market opportunity for you. But I think that's interesting input, and let me turn this over to Zoe now. And again, Zoe, thanks so much for your participation in the webinar, and look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you very much, John, and it's a real pleasure to be here speaking with so many of you today. I really appreciate this opportunity, and we're delighted to be working with PE International, who, as John mentioned, were our first accredited carbon calculator partners. They're a great organisation, and they're one of many parts that the Carbon Disclosure Project has to help us achieve our mission. And that mission is really focused on gathering really high quality information that can then be used to help inform policy and investment decision making around climate change. Because climate change is a really serious issue for business. It's something that's not going away, and it's something that business is going to have to get used to integrating now and in the future. There are huge challenges, and there are actually huge opportunities as well. And the Carbon Disclosure Project has really been built around helping companies identify those challenges so that they can find ways to minimize those, and identifying opportunities so that, of course, they can find ways to maximize those. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. I'd like to give you an overview of what CDP is, and I know that many of you already know CDP, so please forgive me for going over this basic information. But CDP does one thing. It sends an annual information request out to some of the world's largest companies. At the moment, we're sending that request to over 3,000 companies in 60 countries. And those companies provide answers to the questions that we ask on behalf of institutional investors or government and corporate purchasers. Those institutional investors and government or corporate purchasers are what we would really describe as the authority behind our request. Because when we send a letter to the chairman of a company asking that company to provide some very detailed information, in fact, about climate change and how it's impacting the company's strategy, about greenhouse gas emissions and energy use, if it was just sent from the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a 501c3 charitable organization here in the US, we might not get the amount of responses that we do. We're very fortunate, therefore, to have the support of 551 institutional investors with an extraordinary amount of assets under management who are all interested in finding out how climate change is going to impact their portfolio companies, and these government and corporate purchasers who are looking to find out how climate change is going to impact their supply chain. They're looking for ways to future-proof their businesses, and by virtue, the companies who respond to CDP are able to work out how to future-proof their businesses from climate change. So CDP sits in the middle. We provide the conduit through which the information can be disclosed. We have a very comprehensive online system for gathering the data and disseminating the data, and most of the responses that we receive are publicly available. So if you want to go and look at responses from some of your peer companies and see what they're up to, you can do so freely on our website. So if you could move to the next slide, please. Now we have a significant amount of staff here in the US. I'm based in our New York office. We have 10 people working here, and we cover the global 500 and S&P 500 companies from this. But we do have a huge reach globally. As you can see from this map here, the areas in blue represent countries which include companies that receive the CDP information request. And on the left you can see the massive rise in number of responses that we've received to the CDP questionnaire over time, going from 235 the first time we ever sent the request out, now to 3,050. So participating in CDP is really about participating in a global system for gathering climate change information and a way to have that information disseminated globally. It's very important because climate change, as you will all know, is a global issue. It doesn't have national boundaries. An emission that goes up into the atmosphere goes up into the atmosphere and stays there. It does not stay within the national boundary of each country. So please could you move to the next slide. Now CDP is developed from its initial focus of just writing on behalf of investors to companies to establish a number of different programs. And you can see those programs listed here. Investor CDP is really the core heart of what we do. That's the information request that we send out on the 1st of February every year on behalf of institutional investors, and that requires a response by the 31st. We also work with a group of cities using a very, very similar format, asking about the risks and opportunities they face from climate change, asking about their greenhouse gas information, their energy use information, which helps in the planning for insurers and various other authorities who are interested in that area. Our public procurement and supply chain programs focus on exactly the same questions that we ask through the Investor CDP program. They're just asked to customers of corporate or government purchasing departments. So if you are a privately owned company or a company that has a relatively small market cap, in the past you would not have necessarily received the CDP information request. But with the expansion of our supply chain and public procurement programs, this means that companies are increasingly likely to receive the CDP questions because through the supply chain program, for example, a number of corporations such as Walmart, Dell, Pepsi, HP and others have partnered with CDP to send the questions that they answer to the investor program to their supply chain. And that's because they've reached a stage of understanding within their organizations that's led them to believe that their supply chains do have a significant impact on their footprint and therefore present a significant opportunity for reduction. And so they're reaching out to companies in their supply chain to find out where the emissions are within their supply chain and where the risks and opportunities might be. Water disclosure is the most recent and newest addition to our stable of programs and uses a different set of questions that are focused specifically on water. And they've been sent in 2010 to 300 of the world's largest companies and water intensitors. We'll be doing the same thing again this year, and if your company is one of those companies that's been selected from the Global 500, that reduction down to around 300, then you may have also received the water disclosure questionnaire. So if you could move on to the next slide, please.
Zoe, this is John,
Yep.
and a question that was based on your comment around how prepared some companies are, or how mature they are around the implementation of the carbon reporting. And I think that really plays to slide 2 down, and just in interest of time, I wonder if it might work for you to skip ahead
Sure.
to your 1 through 6 slides. I think that's very pertinent. I'm sorry, level 1 through 5.
If you go one more slide down. So this is really a stepped level understanding of a typical company who gets asked to report to CDP. In the first year, the company may have never disclosed to CDP. The questions, however, will be sparking conversations internally about who actually is in charge of climate change and what is the greenhouse gas emission. Do we have any of those? Do we have any strategic implications from climate change? And those discussions internally will then spark, hopefully, the company's first disclosure the following year. There'll be a bit more information. The company may decide not to make its response public. It may have a very weak strategy integrating climate change and may have been unable to report on any of its greenhouse gas emissions data, but has probably started collecting that information. By going through this process, it then reaches the next level where there is someone fairly senior within the organization responsible for this. The company's comfortable with disclosing publicly. They're providing a full qualitative disclosure, so information on the risks and opportunities from climate change and information on management structures to deal with climate change. They're probably also reporting by now on their scope 1 and 2 emissions and are just starting to engage their suppliers on scope 3. The next 2 levels are really where the majority of the Global 500 and a very large proportion of the S&P 500 are now, and that is with very, very high level ultimate responsibility for climate change, a clear strategy in place, a very acute understanding of how the risks that climate change presents to their business relate to their particular sector and industry, and how they're able to identify opportunities from those and capitalize on those. These companies are advanced in their greenhouse gas emissions accounting, and they are therefore able to really set some robust targets for reduction, because until you actually know where your emissions are, it's very difficult to set a reduction target. They've started to move into the area of verifying their data so that it can be trusted even more by the investors who receive it, and they're starting to, if they're in supply chain, they're really starting to embed what they're finding out about climate change into their procurement making decisions as well into their overall strategy. So that's a sort of a typical case study of a company who's been receiving the CDP questionnaire for 5 years. And we fully understand that on the first year or first 2 years you might not be able to answer all the questions. That's okay. It's still very important to disclose what you can and make sure you're considering internally what you're unable to disclose so that you can get there next year, because you will be receiving the request from CDP next year. So if we could move quickly on to the next slide, and I'll try and wrap this up very quickly. I just wanted to give you an example of what happens to